Hello, I'm Robert, a voluntary fact checker and helping you if you're scared of many things. And this is for all the people all the worries that people have about Putin. And he's just so different from the way the media portray him. So you look back and you can find that he is an extremely careful person who never takes any risks. And that's what I'm going to go through here. And he's also the war, he's been like that. So you need to separate away what he says in his words from the way he actually acts. So the one reason that people think, oh well, this person could do anything, is because he invaded Ukraine. And what they don't understand, although we knew this really very early on in the war, we knew early in 2022, then the experts already knew that Putin only invaded Ukraine because he expected to have control of the entire country with no opposition to speak of in 10 days. And it wasn't as stupid as you'd think, because he had previously taken over Crimea in 2014 with very little opposition. And there were only a couple of times that the Russians actually encountered the Ukrainians in anything resembling war, and they won easily. So the way he thought, and I'll go and look at the quotes and things in a bit, and that backs this all up. So what Putin thought is, well, I've put a huge increase in the amount that Russia spends on defence. We're far more capable than Ukraine. We've got much more powerful since 2014. Then he decided to invade Ukraine probably in 2020, and certainly by the exercises in spring of 2021. And then he's a spy, and a spy does not mean what we think of it in the West anymore. It's much more kind of, it's a Cold War era Soviet Union spy is his background. And they are a bit like James Bond. They have a task to do and they go ahead and do it. They're not really intelligence gatherers, which is how we normally think of spies. And unlike James Bond, they don't even have any plan B. Their government is entirely behind them. They do the basics of preparation to make sure they know what to do, and they go ahead and do it, and they expect to succeed. And if you don't succeed, you haven't got a plan for that, because you always do succeed. So when he went into Ukraine, he didn't have a plan B, because he was sure that he was going to take over all of Ukraine as a Soviet-era type operation, like was used to doing as a spy. And to make sure that he knew exactly what he was going to do and that he would succeed, he then he first of all did the military exercises in spring of 2021, and the West hardly reacted to that at all. So he said, oh well, that confirms they're not going to do anything. And then he sent his spies to go into, so he's a spy, and he sent other spies in, a former spy, and he sent them in to do a whole lot of questionnaires of the Ukrainian population to find out how they would respond. And these spies lied to Putin, and they told him that the Ukrainians were totally fed up with Zelensky. They would welcome the Russians if they were to invade and take over Ukraine, and that even the generals would switch very quickly to support the Russians if once they invaded Ukraine. And Putin was so confident, not just confident, he was certain, in the Cold War era, Soviet era kind of certainty, that I was so certain that the invading tanks that we all saw on television, then amongst them, there were vehicles were packed full of the parade uniforms for the parade that they expected to to have in Kiev on probably the second day. And soon after the invasion, one of the Russian papers actually accidentally published a report saying that Russia had taken over Ukraine. And then they quickly suppressed that, of course, because it wasn't true. And so I'll go through that. And I'll go through some of the quotes that establish all this. So what I have here is very strongly grounded. And then ever since then, Putin's been like that all through the war. So for the Kursk incursion into Russia, the first time since the Second World War that anyone has taken over part of Russian territory, then what does Putin do? Then he hid it completely from the Russian people with propaganda. He told everyone that it is just some terrorists that are on foot with rifles. Didn't mention that they had tanks and that they'd taken over the entire Sudza and the railway station there. And then for I'm not sure how long, what was it, 3 months or something, he did nothing. I think it was 3 months, he did nothing. And then his master plan was to ask North Korea to send him some extra soldiers, because unlike a general, he had no plan B for that, so he didn't have any spare soldiers to send to Kursk. They were all caught up in Donbass. So that is how he responds, by doing nothing and pretending nothing happened. And we see this over and over and over again during this war. So that's my quick summary of this, and let's have a little look through, see if there's anything. So this is Russi, which is the world's oldest think tank, advises the UK government, and it was founded in 1831 by a group led by Duke of Wellington, very, very respectable body. And this report was by people who had direct access to Ukrainian special intelligence, and they say Putin expected to control all of Ukraine in 10 days and had no prepared plan B. That's their conclusion. It's not my conclusion, that's their conclusion. So that's what happened. And so here's some bullet points. Yeah, so here's my short answer. He's from the KGB, and they're enablers that do things in secret, and it's a culture that encourages the underlings to lie to their superiors. He relies on Gerasimov for his military advice. So Gerasimov is this very, very incompetent general, and whenever you get a more competent general, then Putin will dismiss them, because he doesn't want a competent general. He wants a general who will just tell him what he wants to know, wants to hear. And then you might wonder, how could Putin possibly not know that Zelensky was elected in a free election, that he had strong support of the Ukrainian people? And the reason is because he depends on his spies, and he has no access to the internet. Probably one of the wealthiest people in the world, if possibly even more wealthy than Elon Musk. But he doesn't own a mobile phone or a laptop, because he doesn't trust the internet. So he never goes online himself. He just relies on his spies to do that. And I forgot to say, he was so confident that he would take over all of Ukraine in 10 days, and that the Ukrainian military would swap to Russia, that all the generals and many of the officers in the Ukrainian army reported getting emails from Russia saying you can have an amnesty if you swap and become a Russian general instead. That was just in the days after the invasion. They were told you can just swap to our side and get an amnesty. And Putin expected them to respond to that and say, yes, I will. Here we are, he spent 7% of Russia's GDP from 2014 to 2022 on defense. And the Ukrainian army didn't show much resistance on the only 2 occasions Russians met them in combat. And he believed that the generals would take him up on his email offer, and that he believed that ordinary Ukrainians wouldn't want to fight back. So that's why the tanks, for instance, the tanks, they stopped and asked the Ukrainians, how do we get to Kiev? Because they just weren't very well prepared. And the Ukrainians would say, well, go that way, but then they'd go off and ring up the Ukrainian military, of course. The Ukrainian military would fire artillery at the tanks. So, or they'd, and then the tanks just ran out of gasoline on the way to Kiev as well. It was a very incompetent army. Because Putin never told the generals what he was going to do. So that was the other side of it. He never did a plan B because he's not from a military background. And he never told anyone except Gerasimov what he was planning to do. Because he was afraid that this would all get leaked to the Americans and to the NATO. And the irony of it is that although his generals didn't know what he was going to do, the Americans did. The Americans had some source or other in Putin's very, very small circle, while his own generals did not. So that's what happened. So as you say, a competent general assumes that an operation is going to go wrong. They always have, and Ukraine always does this, of course. They have a plan A and a plan B, not only that, a plan C, D, etc. They war game it with, which means that they, on desktop with bits of paper and so on, with someone's, you play the Ukrainians, I'll play the Russians, and then let's see if the invasion succeeds, and you move things around on the map and so on. Well, Putin didn't do any of that. He didn't get anyone to play what the Ukrainians would do. So he didn't have any plan B in preparation if the Ukrainians did something different from what he expected. And he never seems to do that. He never has a plan B. So he's very slow to make decisions. So KGB officer, as I say, is more like a fictional James Bond. Has only one chance to get it right. He has to be 100% sure. And he doesn't have a plan B. He can improvise on the spot, but he expects to succeed. So, and the sources I found are very, very clear indeed that he was, that he's very, they call it risk averse, but it's more total risk avoidance than risk averse would be a better way of putting it. He never takes risk. And I talked here about why, and this is my longer introduction, so let's go. So like this ode to a mouse, that best laid schemes of mice and men often go wrong. That's from Robert Burns. But, or as Russians put it, the first pancake is always a mess. But that's what a military man would do. But for the KGB, your first operation has to be a success. You just work it all out until you're sure it will be. And this is Russi's summary. Indeed, the plan itself, while theoretically plausible, combined optimistic bias in each of its stages, I'm just quoting directly from their report, and most tellingly offered no reversionary course of action, no way to retreat out of a situation if it went wrong. Had no decision points to decide whether they should change what they're doing. Didn't account for the needs for those who need to implement it. Didn't afford any agency to Ukraine. In other words, the plan assumed that Ukraine will do what the Russians wanted them to do, and didn't allow them to do something surprising. And no evidence in Russian planning that anyone had asked what would occur if any of its key assumptions were wrong. And the aim of NATO, so the aim of Ukraine now is to, and of its allies, is to end this war in such a way that, and as Mark Rutte put it, head of NATO, that Putin will never ever try again to capture 1 square mile or kilometre of Ukraine or of a part of NATO territory, and ceasefire peace deal in Ukraine will be lasting, will be enduring. So that's the plan for the ceasefire, is that Russia will never get another, even just 1 square kilometre or 1 square mile of Ukrainian territory ever again once the war is over. And both NATO and Ukraine and its allies are confident that Ukraine, with its own army and just with extra equipment and no extra soldiers except a token symbolic force from its allies, that this will be sufficient to make sure that Russia can never invade Ukraine again, but just the Ukrainian soldiers there, and then symbolic patrols in the air and patrols over the Black Sea, in the Black Sea by its allies. And once the ceasefire is well over and it's well underway, there's always phases to this. So the army goes back from the ceasefire line phase by phase. Then at a certain stage, then there's no shooting anymore. And then at some later stage, once it's very clear that the ceasefire has come in place and it's set, then the allies, France, UK, and so on, will do their air patrols over western Ukraine and sea patrols in the Black Sea, just to show the Russians, look, we're here and we're part of all this, and we are committed, and we're going to supply Ukraine with everything it needs, if it needs whatever it needs, if we try to attack again. And then, but if Russia did try to attack again, its Ukrainians would fight, not its allies. So they're there symbolically to show we are here, we are keeping an eye on you. So that's how the war would end. And then Ukraine would be able to keep Russia out, just with modern NATO equipment, and which doesn't have enough of at the moment. And then of course its drones will help a lot too. And they're confident they can achieve this with just a small amount of extra equipment from these allies they won't give during the war, and symbolic sea and air patrols. So you can see from that, the next KGB spy needs absolute certainty. There's no way he's going to attack NATO. There's no way he's going to attack Ukraine once the ceasefire and peace treaty is agreed. And so when you get these things like the flashing drones over Copenhagen, I mean, that was obviously not going to lead to NATO attack. NATO is not all that NATO did in response to that is boost its drone defences. And things straying off into NATO territory, whether accidentally or deliberately, none of this is any risk to Russia. So it's just doing things that it's trying to get seed disunity between Ukraine and its allies. But there's no way that Russia is going to actually do something that would get NATO to actually take part in the war on Ukraine's side. So he's extremely cautious and careful in that way. And I think this is my own interpolation here. This is very likely why he is so slow attending the war. So it's hard to know whether Putin has already decided to end the war, but he's just he's in this 3-month period of indecision. Typically, it seems all the way through the war, it's been about 3 months before he actually acts on anything new. Like with HIMARS, when the Ukrainians got HIMARS in 2022, it was about 3 months before the Russian army stopped storing their ammunition dumps out of doors and them getting blown up by HIMARS. It seems to take about 3 months for the Russians to adapt to some new big change. So right now we've got the Ukrainians destroying the wild berries warehouses. And these, I should just talk about that. The wild berries warehouses, these are valid military targets because they are used to supply because they supply military goods to the Russian army. And so they're dual purpose. If the wild berries had said, we're not going to let you sell your goods via our stores, then they would not be a target by Ukraine. And what happens is that the Russian army, unlike the UK army, where if you sign up as a UK soldier, you get your boots, you get your helmet, you get your body armor, and everything is supplied to you by the government. But if you are a Russian soldier, you get some old crappy gear that's not much use. and you have to go online and buy your own helmet and your own boots and your own body armour. And so they go and they buy that via Wildberries, usually using crowdfunding. And then they buy things like drones and many tens of kilometres of optical fibre for the optical fibre drones and so on. All that is being sold via Wildberries, and that's why Ukraine is targeting Wildberries warehouses. And it's the same with the oil refineries, the same with Wildberries, that Putin is just doing nothing. He's in this indecision point at the moment. Just, well, I'll hide it from the news, hide it with propaganda, and then spend 3 months thinking about what to do next. So that is why and yet he speaks these very big bluffs and makes all sorts of outrageous claims that hints at things that he might do. But in reality, you can see from this that he is not that sort of man at all. And there's loads and loads of quotes here and so on. So I think I'll stop this because otherwise it's at 20 minutes. So this is the introduction. Then I'll go through some of these parts of it. So I'll go through the what experts say about Putin. I'll go through that next. And then I could go through and read some of these quotes to help underline some of what I've said. So I think a series of short videos is a better way to do this. So I hope this helps you to be less scared, and then the next video will underline this with all sorts of quotes from experts going back to 2022 and right up to this year, and all underlining very clearly that this is what Putin is like. And the mainstream media just are not presenting this to us. They simply almost never share any of this material online, which would make the people that I help much less scared if you knew about it. And they're extremely reliable sources like Rusi and many others of similar level of reliability that I'm going to share with you. So I hope this helps you to be a lot less scared already, and then as we go through these next series of short videos, then there's more to come.